Losing game. Eragon watched unsure as Roran prepared to enter the arena. He was shirtless and barefoot, stretching the muscles of his arms and back. "Are you sure?" Eragon asked. "Aye," Roran said with conviction. "Listen. The other competitors are, what? Younger." Roran looked at his cousin with a stern expression. "Well, yes, also they do this every year. Some even train just for this. It's not casual for them. It's pressure on them, not me. I have nothing to lose. I'm old and a bit rusty." "Precisely. You might get hurt." Eragon gesticulated with his palms raised. Roran shrugged. "I can take it. What I can't take is to back away from a challenge. That Urgle will have what's his. If you two meet along the tournament." Eragon crossed his arms on his chest. He couldn't believe that Roran was actually considering joining the games. It was ridiculous. Roran was a middle-aged man that had been away from a fight for many years, except from a brawl or two against rowdy strangers causing too much trouble in Carver Hall. "Don't be so negative, Eragon. Can't you just be supportive?" Eragon sighed and patted on his cousin's shoulder. "Fine, old man. Do as you please. I'll be by your children's side, to comfort them when their father perishes in battle." "Funny. Now rid me of my wards. I can't fight with them. These are the rules. The elves will take care of that, as always." "Good luck, brother." Eragon gave a last pat on Roran's shoulder and walked around the arena to meet his family. Silly man, his cousin, to think he could win against young and strong competitors of all races. If it were the human category, Eragon thought the mighty Stronghammer would have a good chance of winning, but in the general one there was no chance. Simple as that. Eragon shook his head and laughed to himself to think of how stubborn his cousin could be, and apparently the years only made it worse. He reached the spot where Katrina and Ian were sitting along with Murtogh. The other spectators seemed surprised to see Eragon joining them in the bleachers, but opened a space for him. Murtogh moved to the side so Eragon could sit between him and Katrina. "So he's going through with it," he said. Katrina shook her head to dismiss the subject. "Roran is a grown man. If he thinks he must fight, let him be. Don't you worry." Katrina looked at him and lifted her hand to protect her eyes from the sunlight. "Will he die?" Eragon motioned a negative answer with his head, so Katrina turned her head back to watch the arena. Then no. It was clear she was lying, because her lips formed a tense line, and Eragon smiled. After all those years together, Roran and Katrina still had a strong bond. Murtogh poked Eragon on the side to call his attention. "Look. It's the Lord of Sunon," he said low in his ear. "You remember him, right?" Eragon squinted to see the man standing on the other side of the arena, along with the other competitors. He was adjusting his bow, flexing the string, the last edition's champion. "He's the Lord now." Murtogh looked around to make sure that the crowd was more concerned about the wrestling match happening in the pit. "It's recent, that's why you don't know yet. His older brother was ambushed in a hunting trip up north. I went with Rainier to investigate." He looked around again and lowered his voice even more. "Brother, I think we're finally starting to see the first signs that the army of magicians is making a move." Eragon gulped. He was expecting this day to come, the day when concrete evidence would prove his visions right, but to actually live, that moment was unsettling. His heart started to pump fast inside his chest, and he looked at Saphira, sitting on the dragon stand. Their eyes met, and he could sense her apprehension through their link. "This is not the place to discuss it, but I would like to hear everything about it. Do Nasuada and Arya know about this?" "Aye. I informed them in the way to Anga, Oric and Orin." "Half-paw, Gajvog." Murtogh stirred in his seat, and Eragon perceived some discomfort. "Nasuada asked me to hold the information for now. She expects you to tell Oric, since it may be beneficial to your agreement with the dwarves." Eragon frowned. It seemed to him that Nasuada had more influence in the order than he wished she had. He wondered if it had been a mistake to place Murtagh as his representative in the kingdom. Murtagh, he started with a severe voice. Do I have to worry about your relationship with Nasuada? Again, the Red Rider seemed disturbed. He stared at Eragon in a combination of guilt and fear. Brother, I think I need your help. Also, if you decide that I'm no longer fit for my duty in Illyra, I'll understand. Eragon's heart clenched. What happened? Murtagh looked around once more. We'll talk later. Eragon was curious and afraid. It seemed that the problems coming from Alagaezia would never stop, and it was draining beyond measures. He wanted to drag his brother away from prying ears so they could talk about it, but his attention was caught by his nephew poking his shoulder. Ian was standing in front of him and didn't see when his father entered the fighting area. Uncle, can I go play with Saphira? The 10-year-old boy was a copy of Roran when he was that age, and it still amazed Eragon how much alike they were. He looked at Katrina and realized the idea of distracting the boy had been hers, since Roran was already being announced as next competitor in the general category for the wrestling tournament and would have the hardest of times. Eragon was sure. Of course. But ask her if she's available. Saphira is a busy dragon, you know. He smiled to the boy. Ian nodded and seemed impressed. It's because she's very important, isn't it? Eragon smiled further and glanced at his partner. She was following the interaction in his mind, and he could feel the signs of her anticipation. Saphira loved playing with the children from Anga because they made her feel like the most special being. Aye. She always makes time for playing, though. It's worth a try. Ian didn't wait for more incentive. He ran down the bleachers towards Saphira, who let him climb on her tail and step by step moved away from the arena so he wouldn't be able to see the match. Katrina threw him a grateful look to which he answered with a smile. Roran faced another human fighter in his first match and won, not without a few bruises. The man was younger, as expected, but he was an Anga resident. The population of the East would train to fight and compete if they wished, but they had other priorities. In the kingdom, there were the professional fighters, trained to win the games and take the prize home. It was a good amount of gold, but gold wasn't really needed in Anga, except if they decided to buy whatever the merchants were selling. They had everything they needed to survive there, and they worked for a little wage, but mainly to maintain their little society alive and functioning well, so the dragons and riders could be trained and formed. Building a fortune was impossible in the East. After the fight, when the emotions were back at normality, Eragon questioned Katrina about Ismira. She's been spending time with Hope. They haven't seen each other since the egg hatched for her, and she had to start her training in Elismera. Hope was the daughter of Horst and Elaine that Eragon saved from terrible fate by healing her birth condition during the war. Eragon was content when an egg hatched for the girl 4 years before, turning her into the first rider from Carvahall since himself. If the village was sung as a mystical place before, after that its potential for heroism was confirmed throughout the entire kingdom. Right? Do you think Ismira is disappointed that her friend was chosen instead of her? Katrina shook her head with fervor. She would never. Those two are like sisters. She was delighted about Hope's achievement. Besides, Ismira has her own interests. At that last statement, Eragon could perceive a tone of disapproval. Murtagh poked him again on the side with his elbow and indicated the Lord of Sunon with his head. Eragon's jaw dropped. Is Ismira's hand promised to someone, Katrina? Murtagh's elbow hit him stronger this time, and Eragon flinched. What? He mouthed to Murtagh, who shook his head in a desperate attempt to stop him from taking the subject further. Katrina stared at him with a serious look. It would be, if only your cousin would let the lad ask. But no, they run and hide. Her cheeks started to flush, and she threw her hands in the air. It was a stupid territory dispute. I mean, it was political. And now our daughter is going through the horrible situation of hiding her relationship from her father. Roran of all people should know how terrible this is. Eragon alternated his look from Katrina and Murtogh, and his brother simply shrugged. I don't understand, Eragon said to Katrina. Roran had a dispute with someone. This someone is a lad that Ismira is in love with. Katrina nodded as he progressed with his line of thought. And now, Roran won't let Ismira marry the lad. So they meet in secret, secret to all but me. I allow it, Katrina sighed. There's another detail. Eragon waited for her addition to the story. The lad is Dane Taranson, the Lord of Sunon. Do you think it's wise of Roran to quarrel with him? It wasn't wise in any way, in Eragon's opinion. Apart from being a political nightmare, it was big a concern considering the dark times to come. Roran and Dane didn't know yet, but they were the first defense line against the threats from the frozen north. If they didn't create an alliance soon, the problems would just multiply. It is not. Don't worry, Katrina, I'll talk with Roran. Katrina relaxed a bit, but she didn't seem so sure. She smiled at him and nodded, focusing her attention back to the competitions. Eragon traded looks with Murtogh again. His brother would have a lot to explain, for important information was being left out of their scrying sessions, and Eragon hated to be left in the dark like that. From Nasuada's intrusion to the matters in the north, their next order meeting was bound to be tense. During lunch, Eragon sat between Arya and Nasuada. He felt isolated for the entire time, since the human queen was involved in a heated discussion with Queen Manuela of Serda, who apparently had a full recovery from her illness of last year. Arya, on the other hand, was an attentive listener to Oric's description of a new cavern the dwarves had found somewhere in the Bayer that had impressive reserves of an unknown ore. Eragon tried to pay attention to their conversation so he could join them, since Oric was the one sitting opposite him, but he soon realized they didn't need his observations on the matter. Focusing on his food, Eragon ate silently. He left his mind transcend, as he would do whenever he had a quiet time alone. He felt every flavor, every smell. The patch of skin on his nose that had suffered under the sun made itself noticeable, so he transcended the burning sensation after acknowledging it as well. The sounds weren't overwhelming anymore, as the clinking of the cutlery on the plates was a well-composed music, and the chatter was a harmonious choir. He let that tranquility take over his body until a tingling sensation started on the back of his neck. Eragon chewed the last of his food and stood up. The conversations around him didn't stop because of it, so he was safe under his invisibility. He turned and looked across the tent. King Orin leaned against a pole with a grimace in his face and a wine glass in his hand. Eragon hated to do it, but he walked toward the man, dodging the crowd that ate at the many tables set under the dining tent. Eragon bent his head in front of the monarch. Your Majesty. Orin took a sip of his wine and smirked. Hello, Shadeslayer. You finally deigned to address me. A deep breath escaped Eragon's lips, and the tranquility he had acquired through meditation went away with it. Excuse my indelicacy, Your Majesty. I have been distracted. Orin's eyes beamed with a strange satisfaction as Eragon noticed. Saphira passed her concerns through their connection. Be careful with your words, little one. I believe he knows of your antipathy toward him, she advised. Of course he does. I haven't been discreet about it. It's a mistake, but I can't help it. Before silencing to let him conduct the conversation, Saphira emphasized her concerns. Just be careful. Eragon chose to obey to her by using flattery. I would like to express my contentment with your willingness to sign the agreement. You must understand Serda's importance to the development of the whole Alagasia, your importance, King Orin. Orin squinted slightly and raised his chin, which Eragon interpreted as defiance. If I were less perceptive, Shadeslayer, I would say you are genuinely complimenting me, but I know a thing or two. He paced to the closest table and sat on its edge. I know that you wouldn't mind to see me out of the agreement. In fact, I could bet you were plotting to have me out of it somehow. Eragon didn't want a confrontation, but the king was treading on thin ice, being so arrogant about his position of power. Taking an instant to stare at the king to make him falter, Eragon stepped closer to him just enough for Orin to hear his low voice. You know only a thing or two. So don't assume you know anything about me and my riders. He smiled in an innocent way. We might surprise you someday. Orin didn't say a word back. He drank and looked away, a clear sign that the conversation had ended. Eragon turned on his heels and walked to where Saphira was sitting with Fernan. The green dragon blinked an eye to him in an approving gesture, but Saphira was tense. You ever consider staying out of trouble? He laughed out the tension and touched her nose. If you have to ask, then I'm afraid it's a negative to your question. She didn't enjoy his humor, but rested the subject. The rest of the day Eragon decided to spend in silence to avoid any more trouble, but his mind couldn't stop revising the matters of the day. He asked Saphira to help him make sense of all that, the impasse with Arya, the threats from the north, Nasuada and Murtog, Ismira and Dane, Roran and Dane. But they didn't make much progress. Watching the games in the grandstand proved to be a challenge, for the air there felt heavy. Arya wouldn't say much and kept her stoic posture for the entirety of time. Orin would throw resented glances to his direction, and Eragon was avoiding a conversation with Nasuada with the fear of falling into delicate matters. Matters that they should discuss at a better occasion. He decided then to spend time with Nar Gajvog, who had interesting stories to tell and loved to hear about the deeds of his people in Mount Anga. Eragon and Gajvog celebrated together when an Urgal rider submitted his opponent in a difficult fight. The cull beside him was a less complicated company, and he appreciated the refreshment. Eragon, what are you doing? Saphira met Eragon after the games in the Eyrie. He was lifting his body from the ground with the strength of his arms. I'm trying to burn all that bureaucratic fat you like to tease me about. She accommodated herself on her cushion. Couldn't you use magic for that? I'm getting tired just to watch, then turn around. I can't use magic to change my body like that. Where's the sense of accomplishment? Good point. I still think it's stupid. Besides, I only tease you because it's funny, not because it's true. You're not fat. And if you were, that shouldn't be a problem. He lay on the ground and started to raise his torso to the sitting position at a fast pace. Streams of sweat ran through his bare chest. I'm not as fit as I could be. Again, how stupid is that? What if you get lost in the wilderness, in the middle of winter, with no food or prospects of finding a way home? Your body will have to start eating your own guts, because all your stock of fat will be gone. Great. I will be even fitter. He gave her a side look and a smirk. What is that really about? You were never a vain man. I just don't want to be seen as a fat bureaucrat. I told you, Eragon. Is it because of Arya? He didn't respond right away and kept doing his exercises. Why would it be? She's hardly been keeping her hands away from you for the last 2 days, and I believe you want to look good for her. If that's the case, you don't have to worry. She already thinks you look good. Eragon felt embarrassed, but it was a foolish feeling. Saphira knew him completely. She was him. She was him when he felt all the feelings he had ever felt after her hatching. She was him when he felt all the feelings he had for Arya, good and bad, obvious and confused. She makes me feel insecure sometimes. Saphira blew out a cloud of smoke. Don't I know? She said in a tedious voice. He stopped and sat up straight, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Look. One thing is looking good. The other thing is comparing to her, she snorted. You really think she compares herself to you? Saphira's tone was almost hysterical, so incredulous. No, not that way. I mean, she must have some expectations. Her people are the fairest there is. Her last lover looked like some kind of deity, just like her. Saphira rolled her eyes. Her last lover is dead. Very sad, yes, but you're very much alive. And as far as understand the two-legged beauty standards, thin or fat, I really don't think you should worry. Besides, how much can you change in a day? Eragon looked down to inspect his own body. Saphira was right. She only teased him about being fat, because he could see the outline of the muscles under his pale skin. There were times before when they have been more pronounced. That was true, but only because he had been lean like an elf out of exhaustion and for overworking himself while building their academy. However, he liked to be curvier sometimes, more robust, for it reminded him he wouldn't starve in the spine during winter anymore. But still, he wondered if Arya would agree with him. I hope I'm up to her standards as well. Silly human. Blind as a bat, he shrugged and resumed his exercises. Well, whatever that means, I still have time before dinner, so if you don't mind, I'll keep working. Even if nothing changes in a day, she nestled further in her cushion and closed her eyes. And if you don't mind, I won't be watching it. Very, very silly of him to think she would reject him based on the measurements of his body. Like Saphira had said, Arya wasn't shy when using her hands to show her affection, as he was discovering with time, not without surprise. As soon as she had started to be comfortable with her resolution to have him by her side, Eragon felt she was claiming him as her own. When nobody saw, she would run her fingers through his arms and lean against his chest. Frequently, her hands traveled from his lower back to his neck. Her signature move, however, was a strong grip on his hair. It had become a habit of his to expect the pressure and the pleasure on the back of his head. His concerns of rejection were soothed later that night. They were on their little hill after dinner. Fernan and Saphira performed their playful maneuvers down below over the river, splashing water all around them. Besides that, the other sounds they could hear were only the animals in Arya's garden. Arya was quiet, as if she was holding her tongue about something. Eragon noticed this since their conversation in the garden in the morning, but he didn't press her to talk. She had been polite and pleasant all day, but she was being the Arya that everyone else knew, not his Arya, the one trying to mark him as hers with the touch of her fingers. He had learned to listen to her quiet meanings over the years, but in that instant, her silence was deafening. He was standing on the edge to watch the dance between the dragons, but wanted to be sitting by her side on the grass where she could lock him in her iron grip. Eragon took a deep breath and shook his head. The possibility of having upset her with his refusal to join her in the treehouse was a bitter taste that would turn his face into a frown. Making her wait for it was the only leverage he had. If he caved and did what she wanted, what they both wanted, in reality, he would still be silenced by the promise he had made when instead he needed to ask her to commit. He needed her to promise to him this time. To promise that if his plan of preparing Rhaenyra to lead didn't work, she would come to him in definitive. There were great chances that Rhaenyra could fail, so he didn't care how long it took for them to be united forever, as long as he knew they would someday. That she wanted the same thing and was working to achieve the same goal. To imagine that she didn't want the same increased his discomfort. He cleared his throat to avoid a possible grunt of dissatisfaction. It was when he heard the grass moving behind his back, and an instant after her hands glided around him under his arms to hold him firmly in an embrace. "What's wrong?" she asked in his ear. The response of his body was instantaneous. A shiver ran all over his scalp, and his heart jumped. He shook his head again. "You tell me. You've been brooding all day. Do you think I'm mad at you? I know you are." "I just don't know why." Her arms held him tighter, and she pressed her cheek on his neck. "I wouldn't waste our time being mad at you. In fact, even if I were mad, I would still want to make the most of our time together. If not me, then what?" he insisted. "Not you, only your choices." "I just told you I don't want to waste our time, so I expected you wouldn't want that either," Arya said with resolution, but without raising her voice. "I don't. Then come live with me. Rid me of my promise first." Even tighter, her grip didn't feel like a loving embrace anymore. "Will you ever stop this? she almost growled. He sighed. He hated to oppose her, but it happened more often than he would think possible. Sometimes he wondered why fate had chosen her for him to love. It felt too complicated. Even when they were navigating calm waters, he had so many emotions inside it was hard for him to keep focused. I said I wouldn't ask for more, but I wasn't expecting you to be so ardent, he wished to add. It was unexpected. Wonderful, but unexpected. Arya raised her head to press her lips behind his ear as to prove his statement. Her breathing on his skin made the hair on his arms stand up. He closed his eyes to enjoy her caress. You know me. You know I go after what I want. Her melodious voice sang to his heartbeat to accelerate, and soon his chest was going up and down to accommodate the intense rhythm of his breathing. Arya acknowledged his reaction by sliding her hands through his chest, then going down to his stomach. I just didn't know you wanted me that way. Eragon spoke out of breath. Silly man. She whispered again and reached the emerald of his belt, never ceasing to feel the shape of body. So I heard. His voice was faint. Arya slid her thumbs under his belt and left them there while still speaking in his ear. Having her hands there combined with the sweet sound of voice was weakening to his knees. You wish to break your promise, but somehow the fault of this improper behavior of yours is mine. Do you realize you are blaming me for your impulses? Eragon was completely dazed, but he reunited enough willpower to react. I'm not blaming you. It seemed so. But I'm not. He motioned to turn and face her, but her grip kept him in place. Besides, I'm not the only one having impulses lately. She laughed lightly, which confused him. Weren't they having an argument? You can classify my actions as impulses if you need to, but they are well thought. I know what I want from you, and how far I'm willing to go with our relationship. If only you could trust me. Eragon was even more confused. He expected her to be reluctant the next time they met after 10 years, but it seemed that the time apart had created some kind of clarity in her mind, whereas in his mind there was nothing more abundant than anguish for not knowing what to hope for in the future with her. And how far are you willing to go? Arya finally freed him from her grip, but without her arms around him, Eragon felt exposed, unprotected. She moved to his side and looked down. Fernan and Saphira had stopped their game and went to lie on the river bank. In our last visit here, Fernan proposed that I would see our encounters as little treats given to us. A little time every 10 years to spend with those we care about. I argued that you being a human man would constantly ask for more until we see ourselves so cornered that hurting each other would be inevitable. It didn't take long, he observed. Eragon felt guilty. His greed was pushing her away and causing her distress. It didn't, as expected. But the more I think about our situation, more I consider what Fernan and Saphira have as ideal. Look at them. The dragons had their front paws intertwined, and their snouts were resting close to each other. Eragon searched his mind, and noticed that Saphira would almost never lament being distant from her mate during their time apart. She carried on with her duties with great virtue, without ever faltering. The embarrassment took over his being for the many times he had complained, or even cried for Arya in the past decade. Saphira would listen to him and comfort him without comparing their pain, that he understood now was the same. I am the one to blame. I'm sorry, Arya. I'm making this difficult for us all. Eragon said, still looking at the dragons. He felt as she turned to embrace him. As soon as he faced her, Arya held him with the typical iron grip on his hair. He almost smiled. Let's forget about promises and futures. I just want us to live a month at a time. Is that something you can do? Eragon clenched his jaw. Her request was simple, but complex beyond measures. She was asking for his total detachment of what he was raised to believe as being the ideal. According to her proposition, they would live a sporadic romance, or many small ones. Without commitment, they would be casual lovers, fated to live at the mercy of time. On the other hand, that proximity she was creating for them was all he had ever wanted. He dreamed about tasting her lips and holding her close, and now he could do it as he pleased, not because she would let him, but because she made it clear she craved it too. Arya, the one he desired like he had never wanted anything else, craved his touch. It was so satisfying it almost seemed untrue. At the risk of never being the object of her desire again if he refused, he decided to cave and let her win. He nodded, still looking divided between those perspectives. Her eyes shined, but her lips didn't follow. You can't, can you? Eragon swallowed and looked away. Live a month at a time to the fullest. With you. I can. I look forward to. But don't ask to forget about the future. She gave a little tug in his hair to make him look her in the eyes again. Then I won't. Her words carried the scent of her breath that lured him into kissing her, as he wished to do all day. At the contact of their mouths, Arya relaxed her shoulders, and her hands let go of his hair to guide his face to the best way of kissing her. Eragon couldn't help a smirk to emerge on his lips at the thought of her dominance, which made her move away an inch. What's funny? He shook his head and tried to kiss her again, but she escaped his advance and moved away. Arya, where are you going? She was walking to the other side of the hill where she would climb down in lithe jumps. Before she reached the edge, however, she turned to him. I'm going home. Are you coming? Eragon hesitated. He wanted more than anything to share his life with Arya, beginning with the treehouse. That was one of the reasons why he had made it for her after all. Still, he was reluctant to give up his only leverage on their tug of war. Stop torturing yourself. Just go, Saphira intervened. Most of all, stop torturing us. Just go. Fernan entered his mind as well. He let out a deep breath and joined her on the way to the treehouse. When she let the door open to him, he hesitated at the doorstep. Her hand came to his rescue and grabbed his so they could step inside together. Eragon realized that he hadn't made a bad decision after all. If Arya restricted his advances with the terms of his promise, she allowed enough space for them to develop. If she wished to lead, he would let her, gladly. He just hoped she would take them to a safe future together, or he feared he wouldn't survive the failure. Arya walked to the living room and said the words to light up the place. The faint yellow light coming from the candles was enough for him to see that the couch still had signs of their night together in his waking dreams. For the blanket and the pillows were out of place, and the book she had read to him fell open on the floor in a random page. He walked to pick it up and saw that the page was the one where he wrote about all the colors of her eyes. If he were to read something like that, he would certainly be bored before reaching the end of the page, but to write it felt so right, he didn't mind the boring description. He hoped she wouldn't either, and marked the page with the leaf of a flower she had on her desk. Before he could put it back on the shelf, she spoke behind his back. Thank you for the poem. Eragon smiled and held the book a little longer. You are welcome. You know there are others, right? Stories, too. Arya came to his side to look at the bookshelf. About me, his smile grew larger. I don't have many inspirations to write. She smiled as well, but it was a little unsure. He climbed 2 steps of the rolling ladder and put the book back to its place. Besides, someone already made you a flower. I have to impress you somehow. When he climbed back down, her look made him be sure he had said the wrong words. You don't have to impress me. Arya looked through the window that faced the garden as she could see the black morning glory from all that distance in the middle of the woods. I'm sorry, I said it in a jest. I shouldn't have mentioned it. Arya nodded and pulled him by the hand. Come, she called, welcoming him in her home. It's late, and we need our rest to attend the games early in the morning. That night, he was uncertain if the pounding of his heartbeat would let her sleep at all, since she had her head resting on his chest. They had spent the night together before, but never on the same bed. Eragon always thought as a young man that when the time would come for him to share a bed with his loved one, it would be on his wedding night. Well, he wasn't such a young man anymore, and although they wouldn't do what newlyweds do that night, his anxiety was still an important emotion inside his being. It didn't help that his insecurities wouldn't leave him in peace. He was afraid of entering in her intimacy and offending her or hurting the memory of her late companion. Eragon feared not being enough, and the closer she would let him be, more likely it was for him to show her she was making a mistake. He needed her leadership more than anything at that moment. "Breathe, Eragon. Breathe," she said against his chest with her hands caressing him through his shirt. He tried to ease his mind by doing as she instructed. It worked. Soon he felt the same as entering the consciousness of the Eldenari, for his body little by little started to be transcended by the serenity of his meditative state for the second time that day. He stopped feeling nervous, however he didn't feel her body against his any longer. Mourning the loss, he returned to his material state to find her staring at him with her chin resting on his chest. She smiled softly and touched his face with her fingers. "I thought you were leaving me behind." He laughed, feeling the anxiety being brushed away, and said, "Lead the way, my queen, although I wouldn't mind going back to that beach of last night." It was beautiful. Arya accommodated herself more comfortably by burying her face in his neck while her left hand rested on his chest. He opened his mind to her and to their dragons as well, while his own left hand traced the line of her spine over her nightgown. Like he had done in their flight to the dragon lair 10 years before, Eragon raised protections all around them, the way he should have done the night before, but was too distracted to do so. As soon as he locked them all inside, Arya's melody lulled him into their shared dreams that started at the sunset as they flew low toward the horizon. The sandy beach under a starry sky was next. Then he couldn't know for sure who exactly he was among all four of them, but he knew it felt good to fall asleep with an extra warmth around him. He could get used to that, but he was trying not to think about the future too much. He owed them that.